Hello all. Good morning, good afternoon. This is Prathamesh. I'm part of IT Advanced Analytics within Merck Group, and I work as Principal Data Scientist for Natural Language Processing and Artificial Intelligence. For 10 minutes or so, what we'll do is we'll walk you through the solution that we designed for our medical information, global medical information business, and the solution went live this year. So we'll walk you through how we leverage the concepts of natural language processing and text analytics to help our medical information business drive patient value out of it. So before moving on to the actual contents, let me just try to share what we'll discuss today. So basically, we'll start with potential challenges that may be observed while implementing NLP across the pharma organizations, and of course, then I'll move towards the approach that we used for our business and what were the results, findings, what was the approach, and finally what business impact did we derive out of it. So straight away moving on to the presentation. So first of all, I'll just spend maybe a minute to kind of help you understand what are the potential challenges that healthcare companies observe. Of course, we see lot of new innovations, lot of new ideas which are coming up in the area of neural networks. But the challenge is that the data that they use is basically public data. When it comes to applying them on a healthcare data, which is basically varying from clinical to medical to regulatory, it becomes tough to kind of understand that. So data, of course, is in textual format, which is growing exponentially. The variety adds a lot of issues there. And of course, along with this, regulatory concerns, because what happens is when any pharma organization tries to implement such solution, they have to ensure that they are covered and they're secured from a regulatory perspective as well, because of the sensitivity of the data. So we have patient data, we have product data, we have adverse event data, we have several different data points, but they are linked to the regulatory points. And finally, because of all these things, so we have exponential growth of data, we have variety of data, we have regulatory concerns. Because of all these, the data remains untouched because the business experts take a step back stating, okay, let's not try that. So that's why the data remains untouched. So we see a lot of things happening in the public domain, but due to the complexity of the healthcare actual data, it becomes tough to kind of convince them to use these technologies. So basically now, let me move on to the actual approach that we developed for our global medical information business. So just to give you a bit of a background in terms of how this medical information business works. So we have our drugs or active ingredients into therapy areas like allergies, endocrinology, fertility, general medicine, oncology, immuno-oncology, etc. And physicians, consumers, healthcare professionals, patients, sales reps, or even scientists reach out to us via medical information contact center or medical information team to understand about various nuances of our product. So that's why I've shown it as a Merck product. So essentially, they ask about safety of the drug, they ask about efficacy of the drug, they try to ask about and understand about the pharmacokinetics, which is very specific to medical, or they in general try to understand about the potential storage and stability of the drug. So that's how they kind of get these various different inquiries from these users. And what happens is, due to the unstructured nature of these medical data points, so I'm specifically emphasizing on medical data because these unstructured textual data points are not similar to what we see in the market. They are not similar to Twitter tweets. They are not similar to any other public data. So that's why it becomes tough for a medical information expert to go through individual data points, manually tag them or classify them, because they have to individually understand and determine the nuances out of it. So that's why there was a very strong business need to kind of efficiently consolidate all this so that they can understand what people are really asking about. So that's why our idea was to really leverage these advanced techniques of NLP and text analytics to better equip medical information teams so that ultimately they can deliver better patient value back to the user. So that's how this whole opportunity came into the picture. And so when we started this whole activity, we kind of decided upon three key questions that we may want to answer through this. First question is, where are the customer queries coming from? So how the trends are coming along. So whether the inquiries are mostly coming from emails, whether the inquiries are mostly coming from call center, etc. Then what queries customers are asking and how does it change over time? So whether they ask about dosage, usage, temperature, stability, temperature excursions, etc. And finally, as Jeet also explained, we try to understand the satisfaction level of our customers. But typically, since this is a medical data, the traditional sentiment analysis approach tends to not work, because there are a lot of medical terminologies which needs to be considered when it comes to identifying the sentiments also. So the diagram that you see on the right hand side basically has three different components. Of course, the data component is something which comes along. So we looked at close to 150K odd records across 3 years. So the records were coming across the globe. So it was coming from Europe, China, US, etc., etc. So we basically have three components. We have component for data processing, which is very standard components that people use nowadays. So basically tokenization, POS tagging, dependency parsing, shallow parsing, and database connectors to basically fetch the data. Once the data is fetched, then we have a value generation layer, which basically identifies the named entities, the morphs from the data, and some custom logics to determine specific medical conditions. And then finally, we have business insights layer, which is kind of customized in such a way that we use the knowledge base from business to determine any specific value. So for concept linking or for drug adverse event relation extraction, we have knowledge base of medical condition, which we use to take a decision whether this particular inquiry should belong to a particular category or not. So that is how we have derived this business insights layer. And finally, this entire solution is integrated with a visualization layer where business users can really look at these insights and try to understand what kind of analytics is done, what kind of trends or patterns are coming up from HCPs versus patients, and how they can be tackled. So in a nutshell, if I try to explain some of the approaches and techniques that we developed for this. So of course, we basically used NLP, text analytics, and statistical techniques to build an automated scalable process. I'm saying automated scalable because this is in production. So we have to think from that perspective as well, that NLP model has to work well in the production environment too. So we basically have created a categorization engine which kind of creates a categorization. I will not say it's a typical topic modeling technique or a clustering technique, because it has to be close to what business wants to look at. So we basically tweaked this approach in such a way that we basically added a layer of statistical technique to ensure that the categories that we generate are closer to the business. That is the first important point. Of course, second important point is to understand themes and sentiments around which the satisfaction or dissatisfaction is expressed. So we try to identify themes in terms of specific components. We try to identify topics. We try to identify different components. And finally, of course, the idea is to continuously improve the accuracy of insights. So basically, we started with an accuracy of 85%. Of course, we could not use the actual measures because we had to pass it through our business experts. So various therapy area experts reviewed the data, and we finally started with an accuracy of 85 to 86%, and it's continuously improving as we speak. So that's why we have tried to reduce the overhead of data processing through this particular activity. So just to quickly do a deep dive into the approach that we developed. So here is a snapshot of the dashboard that business looks at. Unfortunately, since I work in a pharma which is bound by regulatory and compliance issues, I cannot show the actual dashboard, but still this is a snapshot into how the dashboard looks like. So that's why you see, rather than the typical key phrases that we extract, we are trying to identify more closer themes which are like dose, temperature, stability, etc. And finally, the categorizations to determine whether it belongs to dosage, whether it belongs to safety, whether it belongs to disease state information guidelines or pharmacology. So that's how the dashboards look like. And finally, just to give you a sense of how we try to process the data through lexical change. So the example that you see basically comprises of three different components. There is a component for allergies on cysticid, which requires a document or a report. Then they are also requesting for allergies and rashes after taking cysticid. And finally, an HCP wants to meet an MSL. MSL is a medical sales liaison who will provide this information. So if you see, we have tried to show you how we create the change so that we try to identify specific information which is relevant for medical, not from a perspective of a general approach. So that's how we try to leverage this concept of lexical change to determine the relationship between the words and the medical conditions and the drugs and how they can be used further. So finally, this is how the categorization looks like. So the categorization basically comprises of 4 or 5 different components. So there is a component for dosage and formulation. There is a component for disease state information and guidelines. There is component for efficacy. So these are more related towards the medical side, because if we use the traditional approaches, they tend not to have this specific information. So we can have a layer of clustering, but we need to have a layer of statistical analysis, which is contextualized based on domain. So ultimately, if algorithm understand domain, then it becomes easier for business also to consume the insights and consume the analytics that we potentially have done. So quickly moving along. So yeah, so fundamentally what we have is, now we have some results and findings. Of course, as I said earlier, unfortunately, we are not able to share any specific insights or results because of the nature of the data, but still we have tried to identify and show you how we have used this analytics engine. So the non-obvious insights generated, the column that you see, is basically something was derived from the algorithm. So the category for drug interaction determined whether the inquiries from HCPs are for drug interaction with fruits. If I take a drug with after eating an orange, what will happen? Or if I was taking a drug for a different indication, but it kind of helped me cure something else. So that's how contraindication works, or off-label use. So that is also, if I use a painkiller for, let's say, stomach pain, what will happen? So these are some of the non-obvious facts which we kind of provided back to the business users that we have. And finally, the business impact is essentially around the fact that the business impact was a threefold business impact. First was, of course, to reduce the cost or reduce the time to process the data, which was determined based on the few 100,000 euros that we saved per annum. Of course, the reduction of time to process the data. Then the second fold was more or less around how we can determine strategies out of this. So how we can influence the product strategies that we have, how we can train our customer reps to provide the consistent feedback, how we can improve customer adherence to minimize the risk of patient churn. So how we can help customers solve their issues if the cost is not supported for the drug by insurance. And finally, of course, since we have learned from global medical information, now we have different teams as a part of healthcare. Now the idea is that we start small and then we expand it to corporate, then we expand it to field-based medicine, and then we expand it to brand medicine. So we are not stopping here. So the way we foresee this particular activity is like a phased manner. So we are at a stage where we develop the core of the engine. The business is able to utilize it. The business is able to make sense out of it. And now we are moving towards a stage where we now want to write AI algorithms to suggest next best actions when the MSLs meet physician, how they should interact with them, and potentially removing the human element and try to see if we can have a touchless action where as soon as the inquiry comes in, the algorithm is able to pick it up and kind of pass it through. So it's a journey which we are on. So but we have taken a first step where we have productionized second NLP algorithm that we developed from our organization, and this is how we kind of use NLP for our activities. Yeah, so that's it from my side. So I rest my case and I open up for any questions, suggestions, or any comments, feedback that all of you have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You had the exact timing. That's good. So this time for questions.